What happens when a racist cop punches a black teen? Will justice be served, or will the system protect its own? As protests erupt and dark secrets come to light, one family takes a stand against corruption. But can they win against a system built to silence them? Watch till the end to find out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support the channel. The road home stretched long and uneventful. Maya Thompson slouched in the passenger seat of her father's car, half listening to the low hum of the radio, half scrolling through her phone. The day had been peaceful, spending time with her grandmother in Atlanta, eating way too much home-cooked food and laughing at stories about her dad from when he was a kid. But now, the sun was dipping lower in the sky, casting an orange glow over the quiet highway. They still had a ways to go before reaching Charleston. "Let's stop real quick," Jordan Carter, her father, announced, turning the wheel into the parking lot of a small gas station. Maya barely glanced up. "You hungry?" Jordan chuckled. "Just need to stretch my legs, maybe grab some coffee. You want anything?" "Nah, I'll just run in and grab a soda," Maya muttered, already opening the car door. The gas station wasn't much, just a small, dusty convenience store attached to a row of gas pumps, the kind of place that smelled like stale coffee and floor cleaner. A neon open sign buzzed in the window. Maya walked in, the overhead bell chiming softly as she stepped inside. She moved quickly, grabbing a cold soda from the fridge in the back. The store was practically empty, just a clerk behind the counter flipping through a magazine and an older man picking out lottery tickets. Maya paid in cash, took the receipt, and stepped outside, her fingers already pulling up her notifications. And that's when she bumped into him. A solid wall of muscle and authority. "Watch where you're going," a sharp voice snapped. Maya's head jerked up. Ryan Calloway. White. Mid-40s. Square jaw, thick arms, and the kind of posture that screamed he thought he owned every inch of ground he stood on. His hand hovered near his belt, where his gun and baton rested. Maya stumbled back automatically. "Sorry," she muttered, but Calloway didn't move. His gaze locked onto her, like she had just committed a crime by existing too close to him. "You got an attitude." Maya hesitated. Years of experience told her exactly what kind of man he was. She had seen his type before. She had heard the stories. She knew that cops like this didn't appreciate hesitation. She kept her voice calm. "Measured? No, sir." The "sir" was a shield, not respect. Calloway exhaled sharply, his eyes scanning her up and down like he was searching for a reason to escalate. "What's in your pockets?" Maya frowned. "Excuse me." His voice hardened. "You deaf?" "I said empty your pockets." Her stomach twisted. "I just came out of the store. I have my receipt right here." She lifted the small slip of paper, hoping that was the end of it, but Calloway took a step forward, his stance shifting from authority to aggression. "I didn't ask for your receipt," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "I told you to empty your damn pockets." Maya's pulse pounded in her ears. She could feel the tension thickening in the air, pressing down on her. From the parking lot, Jordan locked the car and turned, noticing the raised voices. His eyes immediately found Maya. Something wasn't right. She stood too still, shoulders too tense. And the cop, he was standing too close. Jordan's gut coiled with unease. "What's going on?" he called, stepping forward. Calloway didn't even glance his way. His focus stayed glued to Maya like a predator sizing up prey. "You've been stealing," he said flatly. Maya's face twisted in frustration. "I just told you I. Watch your tone." His voice snapped like a whip, that tone, that dangerous tone, the kind that turned small misunderstandings into handcuffs. Jordan closed the distance fast. "She's not stealing." Calloway finally looked up, as if noticing Jordan for the first time. "Sir," he said, voice dripping with fake politeness, "I'm asking your daughter to comply with a lawful order." Jordan's patience was running thin. That's not an order. That's harassment. Maya exhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. I have my receipt right here, she said again, reaching into her jacket pocket, and Calloway moved too fast. Crack. His fist slammed into her face before she could even register what was happening. The force snapped her head back and her body hit the pavement hard. The soda bottle rolled from her grip, liquid spilling onto the asphalt. Someone gasped. A woman nearby whispered, "Oh my God." Maya's ears rang, her vision swam, her skin burned. She tasted blood. And then silence. The kind of silence that hummed with shock and horror. No one moved, not Calloway, not Maya, not the growing crowd staring in disbelief, until, "Put your hands behind your back." Jordan's voice sliced through the air, cold, sharp, and lethal in its authority. Calloway smirked. "Or what?" Jordan reached into his pocket, pulled out his badge, held it up. The new chief of police. The power shifted in an instant. Calloway's face twitched, his brain scrambling to process what he had just done. The gas station parking lot, once filled with murmurs and the hum of gas pumps, turned into a dead zone of silence. The dozen camera phones recording pressed like a physical weight against Calloway's back. Jordan's grip on his badge was loose, too casual, but his voice did not waver. "Turn around." Calloway swallowed hard. "Chief, I said turn around." There was no yelling, no theatrics, just cold, even words that cut straight through the thick air. Maya was still on the ground, one elbow propping her up. Her lips swollen, her face burning with pain and humiliation. She looked up at her father. She had never seen him like this before, not angry, not emotional, just done. And Calloway. For the first time he looked scared. For a moment, time froze. The parking lot of the gas station was dead silent, like the world had stopped to process what had just happened. Maya Thompson was still on the ground, her lips split, the sharp taste of coppery blood lingering on her tongue. The sting in her face pulsed in sync with her racing heartbeat. The weight of Calloway's blow still echoed in her bones. And then her father's voice cut through the thick, suffocating air. "Put your hands behind your back." His tone was low, controlled, deadly. Ryan Calloway smirked, still standing over Maya like she was a piece of garbage he'd just tossed aside. He didn't move. Instead, he squared his shoulders, shifting his weight just slightly, the way cops did when they wanted to look bigger, more intimidating. He let out a dry, arrogant chuckle. "Or what?" Calloway sneered, finally turning to acknowledge Jordan Carter. "Big mistake." Jordan stepped closer, slow and deliberate, his presence alone shifting the energy in the air. He reached into his jacket pocket and, without breaking eye contact, pulled out his badge. Charleston Chief of Police. The smirk vanished from Calloway's face. The tension in the parking lot cracked open like a fault line. The crowd saw it. The gas station clerk, the bystanders, the people holding up their phones recording every second. They realized what just happened. Jordan Carter wasn't just an angry father defending his daughter. He was the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the city, and Calloway had just assaulted his child. The once overconfident cop froze, his mouth twitching like his brain was desperately trying to form an escape plan. His eyes darted around, scanning for a way out. There was none. Jordan didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't waver. His badge glinted in the fading sunlight, and his voice, when he spoke, was cold, final, absolute. "Turn around." Calloway hesitated. "Chief, I said turn around." There was no room for negotiation in Jordan's tone. No, "let's talk about this." No, "we can work this out." Just a simple, irrefutable order. Calloway swallowed hard. His fingers twitched by his holster, but he wasn't stupid enough to reach for anything. Not now. Not with half the damn city watching. Someone in the crowd laughed under their breath. "Yo, he just found out he messed up bad." Jordan didn't give Calloway another chance to stall. In one swift motion, he grabbed Calloway's wrist, spun him around, and yanked his arms behind his back. Calloway stumbled, his balance momentarily thrown off. This is ridiculous," he barked, his voice louder now, more desperate than before. "You can't do this." Jordan ignored him, his grip firm, practiced. "You assaulted a minor," Jordan stated flatly, as if reading off a list of facts. "You used excessive force without cause, and now you're about to find out what happens when you don't have a badge to hide behind." The metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut rang out. The crowd erupted. A woman cheered. A man near the gas pump shook his head and muttered, "About damn time." The phones stayed up, recording everything. For the first time in his career, Calloway was on the other side of the cuffs. His face flushed red, not with rage but humiliation. "Chief," he hissed under his breath, "you really want to do this here?" Jordan leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "There is no we, Calloway." The words hit hard. Calloway's entire body went rigid. He was used to being protected, used to his buddies covering for him, used to getting away with everything because the system was built to keep men like him in power, but not this time. The system had failed to recognize the one thing it had never expected: a black police chief who wasn't afraid to break it apart. Calloway's breathing turned uneven, his jaw clenched. Jordan didn't care. He turned toward the nearest officer on the scene, a young cop who had been standing completely still, his eyes darting between Jordan and Calloway like he didn't know whose side he was supposed to be on. "Get him processed." The young officer blinked, as if the reality of the situation had just hit him. "Chief, are you sure?" Jordan shot him a look. "Do your job." The hesitation vanished. The officer nodded quickly, stepping forward to escort Calloway toward a waiting patrol car. Calloway shook his head in disbelief as they started walking, his voice still desperate, still searching for an escape. "You're making a damn mistake," he snapped over his shoulder. Jordan didn't respond, because the only mistake would have been letting this slide. Maya, still sitting against the curb, pressed an ice-cold soda can to her swollen lip. She watched as the man who had hit her, the man who had looked at her like she was nothing, was forced into the back of a patrol car. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't, because she knew the fight wasn't over. Jordan turned back to his daughter, his expression softening just slightly. "You good?" he asked, his voice gentler now. Maya wanted to say yes, but instead she just gave a small, barely there nod, because the truth was this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The real battle was just beginning. By the time the sun rose over Charleston, the video had already taken on a life of its own. Breaking news: Charleston police chief arrests officer for assaulting black teen. The footage spread like wildfire, from Twitter to Facebook, from Instagram Reels to TikTok, from local news stations to CNN. The hashtags trended worldwide. "Justice for Maya, corrupt cops exposed, Calloway must go." It was on every news cycle, played on repeat, dissected by analysts, discussed in comment sections, debated on talk shows. And then people started digging. Social media did what it did best. It unearthed everything. Multiple complaints of excessive force. Internal investigations that mysteriously led nowhere. Civilian reports of intimidation, false arrests, racial profiling. Videos of past incidents, ones that never got national attention before, now resurfaced with captions like, "This guy should have been fired years ago." The thin blue line that had protected Calloway was cracking. But not everyone was on board with his downfall. The police union issued a statement within hours. "This is an overreaction. Officer Calloway was simply doing his job. We stand behind him and expect a fair, unbiased investigation." In other words, they weren't letting Calloway go down without a fight, And it wasn't just the union. The police department, Jordan's own department, was split. Some officers avoided eye contact when he walked in. Others whispered in the hallways. A few had the nerve to outright defend Calloway, claiming he was being hung out to dry. Jordan knew exactly what this was: a battle for control. The old system didn't like what was happening. It didn't like one of its own being held accountable. And now, it was coming for him. By mid-morning, Jordan was called into City Hall. Mayor Robert Whitmore sat behind his polished oak desk, fingers laced together, a deep sigh escaping his lips. Whitmore was a politician to his core, gray suit perfectly pressed, hair neatly combed back, the kind of man who spoke with carefully measured words. And right now, he looked like a man who had just spent his morning putting out fires. "Chief Carter," he greeted, though there was zero warmth in his tone. Jordan didn't bother sitting down. "You called me in," he said flatly. "Let's cut to it." Whitmore leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be." Jordan let out a sharp laugh. "Am I?" "You could have handled this internally," Whitmore pressed. "You know how this works. You've been in law enforcement long enough to understand that these things are delicate." Jordan's jaw tightened. "These things," he repeated. "You mean a white cop punching my daughter in the face and thinking he could get away with it?" Whitmore exhaled. "Look, I get it. You're a father. You were angry. I would have been too." Jordan's eyes darkened. "You think I arrested Calloway because I was angry?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. Whitmore paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think," he said slowly, "that Calloway is an officer with a lot of friends in high places. And those friends aren't happy with how this is playing out." Jordan leaned forward, hands bracing against the desk. "And I think," he countered, "that those friends of his are the reason he's gotten away with this for so long." Silence thickened between them. Whitmore pinched the bridge of his nose. "The union is already involved. They're calling for his immediate reinstatement. The city council is worried about the department's reputation. The governor's office has reached out. I've got dozens of phone calls from people who don't like how this looks." Jordan gritted his teeth. "And what about the people who do like how this looks? The ones who have been on the other side of cops like Calloway their entire lives. The ones who finally saw a cop get held accountable." Whitmore's silence said everything. Jordan shook his head, stepping back toward the door. "This isn't the first time Calloway has done this," he said coldly, "and I won't let it slide." And then he left. Whitmore didn't stop him, because he knew Jordan Carter wasn't backing down. By the time Jordan got back to the station, his phone rang. His deputy's voice was tight with tension. "Chief, Calloway made bail." Jordan wasn't surprised. The system protected its own. His deputy hesitated. "And he's talking about suing you for wrongful arrest." Jordan almost laughed. Of course he was. A man like Calloway was only brave when he was the one holding the cuffs. Now he was playing the victim. Jordan let out a slow breath, rubbing his temple. "Let him try," he muttered, because Jordan knew exactly how this story played out. Calloway wasn't just fighting him, he was fighting the truth, and the truth wasn't on his side. The noise outside the Charleston Police Department was deafening. A sea of angry voices, raised fists, and cardboard signs stretched down the city block. Justice for Maya. No more Calloways. Accountability now. The air was thick with anger and energy, a collective force of outrage and exhaustion. This wasn't just about Meyer anymore. This was about all the Calloways before him. Civil rights leaders took the makeshift stage, the steps of the police department, urging the city to demand change. This is bigger than one officer. How many complaints were buried? How many voices went unheard? How many more before we say enough? The news cameras rolled, capturing history in the making. And inside the department, Jordan Carter stood at his office window, watching it all unfold. Jordan had expected backlash. He had expected anger from the police union, expected the city's power players to push back. But he hadn't expected this. This wasn't just about Calloway anymore. This was a war against a system that had let men like Calloway thrive. And Jordan, he was the one standing in the way. The first signs of trouble started early that morning, a quiet murmur among the officers, a shift in the way people looked at him when he walked through the halls. He could feel the resistance like a storm pressing in. Some cops refused to make eye contact. Others whispered in corners, their conversations cutting off the second he passed by. And some weren't even hiding whose side they were on. Calloway might have been suspended, but he still had friends in the department. And those friends, they wanted revenge. By midday, Jordan was summoned back to City Hall. Mayor Robert Whitmore sat exactly where he had before, behind his massive polished oak desk, except this time there was no pretense of politeness. The police union president was there too, a bulldog of a man with a thick neck and a face that looked permanently angry at the world. Whitmore got straight to it. "Chief Carter," he began, "this situation is getting out of control." Jordan didn't speak, just crossed his arms and waited. "We have a city in chaos," the mayor continued, "a department divided and a media storm we can't contain." Then came the real reason Jordan was here. "The union has suggested a solution," Whitmore said. Jordan didn't blink. "Let me guess, reinstate Calloway." Whitmore didn't answer. But the police union president smirked as if Jordan had finally caught up. "It would ease tensions," the mayor offered, "calm the city down." Jordan let out a sharp breath, his jaw clenching so tightly it ached. There it was, the game they always played. A dirty cop gets caught. The system panics. And instead of holding him accountable, they try to shove him back into power, hoping people will forget. Jordan took a step forward, his voice like steel. "If the system refuses to change," he said slowly, deliberately, "I will break it myself." Silence. The union president leaned back, unimpressed. "You can fight the system all you want," he muttered, "but the system fights back." Jordan didn't flinch. "Then let's see who wins." And with that, he walked out. Maya hadn't slept. Not really. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt it again, the impact of the punch, the weight of the pavement against her back, the humiliation of strangers watching her bleed. She scrolled mindlessly through her phone, reading the news updates. Her name wasn't in the articles, but she knew they were talking about her. 17-year-old black girl assaulted by officer. The teenage victim at the heart of the Calloway scandal. She barely recognized the girl they were talking about. She wasn't some civil rights warrior. She wasn't some symbol for justice. She was just Maya. And yet thousands of people were chanting her name outside the police station. She opened Twitter. Regretted it instantly, because while some people were fighting for her, others were ripping her apart. Maybe if she wasn't being suspicious, this wouldn't have happened. Her dad is the police chief. She's obviously just playing victim. She should have just done what the officer said. She locked her phone and pressed her fingertips against her temples. It was like watching people rewrite what happened, like the truth didn't matter. Her father had warned her about this, but knowing it would happen didn't make it hurt any less. She glanced out the window at the crowds outside the police station, at the people holding signs with her name, at the mothers with their children holding up posters saying, "Not one more." And suddenly, she understood. This wasn't just about her. This was about every black girl who had ever been knocked down and forced to stay silent. This was about the ones who never got justice. This was so much bigger than her. Maya exhaled, staring at her reflection in the glass. She had a choice. She could stay in this room, reading every cruel comment, letting strangers define her, or she could step outside and let them hear her voice instead. The air in Charleston was heavy, thick with tension, frustration, and something else entirely. Change. It wasn't just the protests outside the Charleston Police Department. It wasn't just the news headlines, the online firestorm, or the whispers inside City Hall. It was the feeling that something fundamental was shifting. And Calloway, he was at the center of the storm. The deeper people dug, the uglier the truth got. Ryan Calloway wasn't just a bad cop. He was a protected bad cop. A laundry list of complaints surfaced: use of excessive force, intimidation tactics, racial profiling that went unchecked for years. Bodycam footage was lost. Witness statements were dismissed. Internal investigations ended in lack of evidence. And now the system that had shielded him for years was starting to crack. The public was furious. City officials, panicking. The police union, still fighting tooth and nail to defend him. But even Calloway's own allies, the same people who had spent years covering for him, protecting him, were now distancing themselves. We trust due process to determine the outcome. This matter is still under review. No further comment at this time. The tone had shifted. The same people who once stood behind him were now stepping back, waiting to see how this played out, because at the end of the day, no one wanted to sink with a losing ship, and Calloway, he was sinking. Jordan Carter was summoned to City Hall. Again. The mayor's office was too cold, too quiet, like a place where decisions were made without any real understanding of what they meant to the people outside. Mayor Robert Whitmore leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping against the polished wood of his desk. "You turned this into a war," he said, voice calm but sharp. Jordan exhaled through his nose, arms crossed. "The war existed long before me, I just refused to ignore it." Whitmore studied him for a long moment. Then he leaned forward. "The police union wants Calloway reinstated." Jordan didn't blink. "Then they'll have to go through me." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "You're putting yourself in a dangerous position, Carter. You know that, right?" Jordan didn't move, didn't flinch. "Good," he said. "Then I know I'm doing something right." The mayor sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. But he knew Jordan wasn't backing down, and that changed everything. The next morning, Charleston woke up to headlines they couldn't ignore. Police Chief Carter refuses to reinstate officer who assaulted black teen. Charleston residents demand systemic police reform. Maya Thompson's name becomes a symbol of justice. The pressure mounted. The police union doubled down, calling Jordan a reckless leader. The city council scrambled, divided between those who wanted Calloway gone and those who wanted to protect the status quo. But the people were louder than they had ever been before. Maya Thompson woke up to the sound of her phone vibrating non-stop. Messages, news alerts, more notifications than she could process. She stared at the headlines, at her own name plastered across articles and protest signs. She was a symbol now. A part of her still hated it, the way people looked at her differently, the way complete strangers thought they knew her pain. But another part of her felt the power in it. She stepped toward the window, looking out over the streets of Charleston. The protests were still growing, stretching blocks down the city, people chanting her name. And for the first time since Calloway's fist hit her face, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like just a victim. She felt like she was standing up, like she was fighting back, like she was finally being heard. Inside his office, Jordan watched from the window, watched the thousands of people rallying outside. Watched as Maya stepped into the middle of the crowd, no longer hiding in the background. And then the mayor walked in, the same tired expression, the same frustration in his eyes. Whitmore looked at Jordan. "You're really not backing down," Jordan turned, meeting his gaze head-on. "Not now." A beat of silence. "Not ever." Whitmore exhaled, long and slow, because he finally understood. There was no stopping this, no quieting it down, no sweeping it under the rug like all the times before. This wasn't just a bad cop getting caught. This wasn't just a department scandal. This was a reckoning. As the sun set over Charleston, Jordan and Maya stood together on the steps of the police department. They looked out at the thousands of people standing with them, chanting, holding signs, demanding change. This wasn't the end. This fight was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like they were winning.